Hey, folks, welcome back to the Living in the Virtue of Your Strengths podcast here with Metanoia Catholic. My name is Matt Ingold. I am a Catholic mindset coach, but also a certified Gallup CliftonStrengths coach. And here on this podcast, what we love to do is we love to explore the different signature themes and the domains and identify how can we show up as gift in these areas of talent. Right? We look at John Paul II's personalism. We know that becoming fully human means becoming fully a gift to one another. Man cannot know himself until he makes a sincere gift of himself. So here on this podcast, we'd like to look at the signature themes and ask that question, how can we show up as gift? Another way of asking that question, how can we show up in the virtue of these strengths and tame them, right? We name, claim, and aim our strengths, as Gallup says, but we also want to be able to tame them so that we can possess them and offer them as gift. Today, we're going to be exploring empathy, the talent of empathy. And I'm excited about this because it is in my blind spot here, folks. So I prepared the slides here, but there's going to be a lot of education coming from the gallery of men and women that we've got on the call. We've got a lot of people that are have it in their dominance. Some people have it at 1. What's that like? Here, it's like my 32 or something like that. So, but I can be empathetic, folks. I can be empathetic. These are all accessible to us. Okay. So we're going to be focusing today on that talent of empathy. We always like to identify what drives this talent. What is the primary motivation? And we're going to be pulling from the gallery here for people to kind of share how their empathy, what drives their empathy. Because we know that, yes, while the motivations is really what distinguishes one signature theme or Gallup talent from another, we know that there's very nuanced ways that they show up based on where they fall amongst those 34 talents, right? And so we love hearing the nuanced expression of these themes. So we're going to focus on empathy, and then we look at the virtuous, vicious ways that this theme can show up, and what are the mindsets behind that. Here at Metanoia Catholic mindset coaches, we fall in line with John Paul II's theology of the body. The body, and it alone, is capable of making visible the invisible reality of the person, right? What is spiritual and what is divine. We know that there's a thought behind the way that these talents show up. So what is that thought, perhaps? And we'll have a little discussion there. Excited? I'm excited. All right, let's get right into it. So the first thing I like to do is just give a little bit of backdrop here to how Gallup defines empathy. All right, so we just pulled this directly from one of their cards that they actually give us at certification. So the empathetic person says, I am being an emotional person. I will make the visceral explicit. So what they feel, they will communicate it. I bring, this is their contribution, emotional intelligence. So think about an empathetic person on the team. They can be very aware of the emotions that are around them and other people. I need, so this is one of those requirements to be able to show up in the true strength of this talent, freedom to laugh, cry, and vent, right? We're talking about venting here. So stay tuned for that. I love, so the value that they really are moved by is the gladness, sadness, madness of humanity. Isn't that fun, right? The full spectrum of emotions, they see value in it. I hate, this is the thing that they're moving away from. They want to get rid of it. Those things that block or limit emotional expression. So maybe you're watching like a British show or something like that. I don't know. Downton Abbey, sometimes it's just like, would you just kiss the person from now? Or would you just cry or show a little bit of emotion? You're all emotionally constipated. Maybe you're triggered by that too. Okay. No offense to British dramas. Okay. All right. It's just a little bit different here on the other side of the pond. The metaphor that describes this person, a person's affect will often determine their effect. Their affect, that emotion, will often determine the effect that they have. And finally, that barrier label is bleeding heart. And we get into barrier labels. This is kind of like when people don't see the strength or the contribution, but rather they just poo-poo how it shows up. And so this is kind of like that label that gets thrown around. Okay. So that's how Gallup gets into it. What I like to do here on this point of the podcast is kind of paint a little bit of a word picture. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can see kind of what I threw up on the screen here. And I love inviting other people that are on the call to be able to add to this word picture. So one of the things, if you're just listening on the podcast, that you can I've got up here, so I've got a heart with a thermometer there. And I see like that being very keen on measuring the emotional temperature in a room or in a group. Okay. Here, I've got another image of somebody, a man comforting somebody that is, it looks like they're ill in this case, and there's a heart on the sleeve. I see that empathetic person as wearing those emotions on their sleeve. Okay, so when they're upset, when they're feeling happy, they're joyful, they're very transparent emotionally. I've got the brain and the heart, a lot of heart here, right? Because it's ties to that image of emotion. The brain and the heart shaking hands. Like there's great emotional intelligence that we just read in those, even the way Gallup defines it. There's great emotional intelligence that brings together. But then I also have kind of, it's a little stereotypical, but the two women with the bowl of popcorn in the hand, and they're obviously watching like a Hallmark movie, and they're got the box of tissues out and they're just crying. People that are empathetic, I saw this and I like this because I find people that are high in this strength, they are easily moved emotionally. And they're not afraid to be moved emotionally. There's a freedom that they have when they're living in the virtue of this strength to show up emotionally. Okay. Let's add to this, folks. So I'd love to start drawing in. Teresa, you're number one here. So I'd love to invite you to come and unmute yourself and add to this image. You already said you had some more stuff you wanted to put into this. If you got something else here, folks, raise your hand so I can call on you and bring you onto the call.
From the report from Clifton, they said under empathy was a natural aptitude to overcoming difficulties because I'm able to have ready insights into the moods and emotions of others, can read the room well. That might fall under your heart with the thermometer, but it had to do with more like the whole room. You can really tell when someone is just going through the motions. You can really pick up a lot of details just in how they're standing in front of you.
Okay, so body language, very attentive to body language. And so let me ask this, when you're in a room, say in a group setting, and I don't know if a certain setting comes to mind for you, Teresa, and you see somebody and the thought that you have in your head is like, okay, based on what I'm looking at, this person looks disengaged.
Yeah.
Okay. Or they look like they're not really emotionally present, or there's something that is setting them apart from where they should be, or they think they should be, or what the rest of the group is going through. What do you feel inclined to do in that place?
It depends on, if they're giving off a real negative, it's like something is going on with them that is causing them not to be engaged.
Okay.
Or is it the message is just hitting something in them? So I'm more like curious wonder what's going on. Which way is it leaning? So, and then that gets my brain off paying attention to what's being told in the room and onto, that's the negative side for me, is then I'm focused on wonder what's going on with them.
Oh, maybe it's a negative side. I mean, like it's hard to make a judgment at this point. Let's just kind of observe it for what it is. So what I hear you saying is that when you see something, and the thought comes in that something is not landing with this person, or there's something I'm attentive to some emotional stuff going on with this person, where your head goes is you start to wonder what might be causing that in the other person. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
A curiosity about what's going on with them comes about. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a deep curiosity of what's going on. And is this something where you say it's negative because it distracts me from whatever is going on in the focus of that meeting? But what if we just didn't say it was negative? It just happened to hijack your attention, so to speak, very naturally.
Right. So if I want to go to a meeting that I really want to be engaged in what I'm learning, I need to be sitting up on one of the front rows. If I'm back further, I am just into everybody's emotion and what's going on, who's paying attention, who's not. So.
Wow, that is fascinating. That's amazing. Awesome. Okay, so we could see maybe something that we'd add to this picture then is just an emotional curiosity, like a curiosity of what is going on in a person, right? But also like this very natural way of just, as soon as you see something, there's a desire to understand what's going on. I can tell you this as a choleric, also as, you know, with empathy, I can be empathetic. I definitely can. But also it being kind of low, I don't naturally go there. I can look at it and I could see somebody, and I am attentive. I can see when something is not really landing well, but I'm very easily able to compartmentalize that. And Jane, I see your head nodding here. I know you're kind of relatively low on the empathy with me. They're at 27, you said. What's it like for you, Jane?
You know, this is one of those, when I first got my report, that really struck me like, wait, that can't be right. I in the past have always identified with the heart on the sleeve. I show my emotions. I attribute it to my Italian. Now I attribute it to my sanguine and choleric.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really hard to process the fact, like literally, like, wait a minute, this test is wrong. Empathy at 27? No way. However, one of the things I have discovered through the strengths is that even our lower strengths that don't kind of like take that negative, we can, the way my trainer taught me is like, it's almost like, what are those things that you sit outside and you bounce on? I can't think. Trampoline. Sorry, I'm totally. I could picture, but it's like a trampoline, like you're going down to, and then you're using another strength to go up. So one of the things for me I've discovered is woo is very high, number 4,
Mm-hmm.
connectedness is number 10, and that's how I use my empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And I also discovered in my state in life, I'm menopausal, so I'm just much more, sometimes things just strike me. Like during the war, back in the early 2000s, I literally could not watch the news because I can't watch Black Hawk Down. I used to live in Africa and like I just get, and I remember at 5 when my dad was in Vietnam and we watched General Custer movie, and I literally was crying that my dad was General Custer at Little Bighorn, and my brothers. I have this memory of my kid. That's not dad. That's not dad. That's not dad. So it really, it was this was a disconnect for me of acknowledging that it was only 27.
Yeah. So like, and let's be clear. It doesn't mean that if you're low in empathy, you're emotionally cold, right? Or that you don't feel emotion, or that you're not necessarily even overt with your emotions, or people can't read your emotions. But where empathy kind of has that, I think we go back to like what Teresa said. And Michelle, I want to bring you on here to kind of share your pieces here as well. What Teresa just said is there's just kind of this inclination to be emotionally curious, and really there's a desire to connect with people with empathy. But it was interesting also, Teresa, it's like there could be 25 people in the room that are in a great place, but you see the one person that doesn't look like they're really in a happy place. And that is where you feel inclined to go, right? To the one lost sheep, so to speak. Michelle, can you, you got your empathy at number 4. We've had lots of discussions on empathy and over the last couple of months. Tell us a little bit about what you think could add to this picture.
I just like what you said, Matt, about how you're drawn to that one lost sheep. When you use the word inclination, I think it's not even a conscious decision. Mm-hmm. It's not a conscious inclination. We just are drawn. you almost can't help it, so so it can become very unconscious in a good way or in a not so good way, right?
Mhm.
And I think later on, when you talk about virtue and vice, the Academy is talking about boundaries this week or this month. And I think that those of us who are highly empathic, or even high woo, kind of mirrors empathy sometimes, right? Boundaries are a really good thing to
Mhm.
be able to honor there. But yeah, I love the way you said, you're inclined to, but I don't even know that we would say inclined. It's just something that we naturally do. We're just drawn to, like you said, scanning the room. We don't even know we're scanning. We're not scanning.
Mhm.
It's just there.
Right, right. And even that inclination, we use that when we're talking specifically about habits. Like what does it mean when something is habituated? We just kind of naturally there's a current that's just kind of, it sweeps us away. And I love how you already started to kind of tap into a little bit how, even in the areas of boundaries, just because you have a current doesn't mean it's going to take you to a place where you want to go, or a place that really is leading you to show up as gift, because that is our goal here, with living in the virtue of these strengths. Folks, is there anybody else that wants to kind of add in to this picture here? So I can hear even like maybe a current, like an emotional current that you can kind of, it's easy to get swept up into. Carrie, I know you're high. Carrie, is there anything you want? Are you saving your rounds for some of the later discussion?
Well, it's interesting because I can so relate to this as I'm sitting here looking at the description of empathy. Certainly, when I'm looking at the picture, I can relate to all of them. I would always refer to myself as always wearing, my heart on my sleeve. And, it's interesting what I've learned too is that, rather than being the thermostat, it's about being the temperature. So that's been a huge thing for me. And certainly, I have always experienced like the emotions of others. It's funny because I just kind of jotted down on my notebook. I used to cry at cotton commercials. Remember way back when, those cotton commercials? So I get very emotional, but I have a better sense now of where those emotions are coming from. So this has been pretty powerful for me. So this is, I'm grateful to be here and to learn more about my number 8 strength of empathy. So
Beautiful.
it's pretty
Beautiful.
cool. Yeah.
Awesome, Carrie. All right, folks, I'm going to jump over to kind of like where I had kind of figured what's the primary, or what could be a primary motivation for empathy. Because again, what really distinguishes these talents from one another is where they desire to rest. So when we talk motivation, it's like when I'm here, when I've arrived at this place, I don't need to go anywhere. I can just kind of, I'm satisfied. There's an element of satisfaction that's there. So how does this land here, folks? The motivation for the empathetic person, high in empathy, is holding or making space for another's emotions. Holding or making space for another's emotions. I intentionally avoided saying negative or positive emotions, but just holding the space. When we say holding a space, what we mean is judgment free. It's there. Let's just allow it. Let's notice it. Let's not demand that they change their mood, right? So positivity may want to come in and do some silver lining with this and kind of turn up, like they're the dial on the thermostat that wants to turn up the emotional temperature. But rather, the person that's empathetic is content to just acknowledge where the other person is and just abide with them right where they are. How does this land? Justin, I don't know if you're able to jump in here, but I know you've always got great insights. You're high intellect. You got all those great thinking skills. So we've moved away from pictures, man. Okay, so we're leaning on your green strengths here.
Yeah, no problem. No, I think that's right. And in learning what I've learned about the model of, thoughts lead to emotions, lead to actions. I think where empathy really comes into play is that, um, knowing that emotions lead to actions, uh, until you're right with those emotions, whatever they are, you can't get good action. You can't move forward. And I think empathy, people strong with empathy naturally understand that. It's not, the desire isn't to push someone, but make it possible for them to take another step on their own, and to sit with them and process through whatever it needs to be until that happens. And sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes a while, but sometimes just recognizing that an emotion exists is half the battle. And I think that's what empathy does really, really well. Um, Now, the flip side of that is, you don't want to wallow in the emotion either. And holding space can become wallowing if it's not unchecked and there's not some sort of destination in mind. But progress for empathy, I don't think is measured against moving forward. I think it's measured against the gaining of ability to move forward, if that makes sense.
Okay. So we're kind of, it sounds like what I'm hearing from you, Justin, is that there could be almost kind of leaning on that we're naturally moving into this vicious and virtuous sides of this empathy talent. We're just kind of staying wallowing, right? And when we define wallowing, I mean, I think of somebody wallowing in self-pity where they want to stay there and they want to sit in it and they don't want to move out. I mean, and it's maybe a season of wallowing is okay, but to remain in wallowing, right, is never going to serve
Right.
anybody, right?
No,
Really
exactly.
well said.
And I mean, and I think people with empathy understand when you kind of cross that barrier too. So, someone is recognizing emotion. When they finally come to term with the emotion, I think that's when empathy has done their job. And, you get that result of somebody that finally understands, this is why I feel this way. This is why I feel this way. So now I can do something about it. Once you hit that mark, I think that's what empathy lives for. And then what happens after that is great and fine, but that other strengths come into play at that point. But for empathy, it's letting someone get that closure on an emotion and recognizing it and seeing that, an emotion is a passion and a passion is going to drive me forward if I let it, and, ultimately no emotion is bad. Just what are you going to do about it? And I think empathy is ready to sit there and help that person figure it out, understand that this there, really understand what that emotion is. When someone says I'm mad, I think people with empathy naturally understand that mad can mean a lot of things. Like, are you sad mad? Are you angry mad? Are you frustrated mad? What is it? All three? Is it some, whatever the case may be. And even on the positive emotions too, just helping people cherish those emotions, relate to them, but then know that they're there to do something good.
Right. Right. And so I hear the seeing somebody's emotion. I love that language because so much of just showing up as gift is being able to see, or showing up as loving, as being able to see the other person. And goodness gracious, we're not angels, folks. We have these emotions. And so part of seeing a human person is seeing their emotions as well. Lest we, reduce the person down to just this pure intellect, which is an angel, right? And so seeing an angel versus seeing a person, you need to see the emotions here if you're really going to see the full person, right? That curiosity, I keep coming, now we're kind of coming back to this emotional curiosity that even Teresa spoke about in the beginning, is that even some of those questions, like what kind of angry is it? It could be this nuance, could be this nuance. There's an emotional curiosity, but even that all kind of going to rest in this place of seeing the other person and holding the space, making a space for this other person to just be. Recently we had, well, Aaron and I went out to dinner with a couple, and they kind of shared some struggles that they were going through, and one of them, who was melancholic temperament, and his spouse was a sanguine temperament, had just shared how often he just felt unseen by his wife, and his wife, who was high positivity, often wanted to just see that negativity and just turn up the emotional temperature of the room. But in doing so, she was arguably dismissing the emotion that he was in at that moment. And so as soon as we kind of gave them a little bit of counsel on how to be able to hold the space for that emotion, her spouse said, once I've been seen, I am now open to somebody offering the silver lining. But it's being seen first and being loved in that place where perhaps you don't even feel like a very lovable person. I mean, usually when you're sad, you don't go out and you just try to interact with other people, right? But you desire to be loved and seen. I think even my daughter does this. Like when she's kind of in a sulky mood, oftentimes we're learning here. We're like, jury's out, folks. She's a melancholic. At least right now, she's a melancholic. But just even this morning, she was in such a mopey mood. We were trying to kind of reason through her about going to school and how all of her friends are going to be there. But all of that was being filtered through this emotion of, these kind of sad colored glasses. And she kept, every time we offered something positive, she offered something negative. And it was amazing. I was a 4-year-old. And finally, what turned the tide is when she was just sitting there, she was kind of moping about eating breakfast. And I just went up next to her and I just said, I want you to know that I love you so much. And I just put my hand on her back and said, I want you to know I love you so much. And that started to shift a little bit. And then I asked her, who do you love? Do you love Annie, like our dog that was right there? And she was like, starts nodding her head. I was like, how much? And so it's like, I started playing this little game about how much. And she was giggling, and all the focus was off herself, and it was on those people that she loved. But it started with just seeing her and loving her in that place. And praise God for the grace to just know what to do in that moment. All right, folks, let's kind of jump forward here. Jane, I see your hand ready to go. All right, as we're moving forward here, Jane, you go ahead and peanut gallery comment. Go for it.
I just wanted to say not just seen, but also heard, because the gift of empathy is sometimes someone can't describe their emotion. And I have discovered that with melancholics, they have this feeling so intense, but when you ask them to describe, and an empathetic person can sit with them and help identify and process. And we've been taught that sometimes some emotions are not okay, and being able to create that space to let them just be, like you said, just be like, yeah, you want to be angry? Here's a pillow, shout at it. And then it gives them the freedom to be who they are. And that has been a gift with empaths, a real gift with others of, so.
Yeah, I could see how these people would be good greeters. They'd be good people to kind of have on the team in the parish that can kind of just, be attentive to decisions that are being made and how they might impact other people emotionally. Not that they don't have their own freedom, emotional responsibility, but just be aware of this. We're going to jump now into the scripture. So I pull all the scriptures from this call from the book, Living in Your Strengths, Catholic Edition. Okay. So it's a great book that's out there. And they offer some of these scriptures paired with the different talents. So this one is from John chapter 11, 33 to 35. It's when Jesus weeps at the tomb of Lazarus. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. And then I want to invite people on the call to just kind of share, almost even Alexio Divina style, how this resonates with them and how this hits them, particularly in living out the strength virtuously. The strength of empathy. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Sir, come and see." And Jesus wept. I can tell you one of the things that kind of I see, certainly there's words, there's perturbed, deeply troubled. Jesus wept. Certainly there's an indication of this movement that's going on. And what amazes me is Jesus knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. But even in that moment, it wasn't silver lining thinking. It was like, oh, don't worry about being sad right now. I got this. I'm going to take care of this. He was showing us just the importance of just seeing and allowing ourselves to be vulnerably moved by somebody else in their place of pain. And I love this definition of misery, that misericordia, a heart that gives itself to those in misery. So here I see this merciful heart of Jesus just abiding, in this case with Martha and Mary and the other people that were there, just abiding. And I love how the scripture goes on to say, see how he loved them. See how he loved him. There's and just that witness that when we allow our emotions to move us in a way that takes the visceral and makes it incarnate, makes it visible, sensible to the world around us, there's a divine revelation that's going on here. There's a revelation of the Imago Dei, right? Remember, one of those foundational pillars of our Catholic anthropology that we're always talking about, being made in the image and likeness of God. Jesus felt these emotions, and dare we say he felt every emotion. Every emotion. Even those arguably, now I don't know if this is true. All right, so this is kind of my thoughts. I wonder sometimes if Jesus even felt our antecedent emotions, because in the scripture that it comes to mind is how St. Paul says, he who did not sin became sin. He experienced the weight of our sins, including our antecedent emotions, those antecedent passions that inclined us towards sin. I wonder, I could be off here, but this is just something that I wonder. I open up the floor here, folks. How is this landing with you as you read through this, and how does it impact how you think about your empathy strength? Michelle, I'm going to call on you first.
While you're talking, Matt, and I'm thinking about, empathy. I'm thinking someone in particular, empathy can be very practical as well. And I think that what we understand is that Jesus is the perfection of all 34, right?
Mm-hmm.
So while you're reading, I'm thinking he's also very strategic and futuristic because he knows he's going to raise Lazarus. So he's weeping with her while she weeps. And like you were talking about before, he's not going to wallow there. He's not going to stay there long because he knows something else is coming. Right. So I'm just thinking of all those other strengths too, that are in him, the perfection of all of them.
Beautiful, beautiful. And it's another scripture that comes to mind here is when he looks over Jerusalem and he says, Jerusalem, and he weeps over Jerusalem, how I've longed to bring you under my wing like a mother hen to her chicks. And there's a sadness. And I think of even parents whose kids are in apostasy right now, they're away from the faith, and just that sadness, how Jesus even holds a space for that sadness of when his church is in apostasy. Does anybody else have anything else to share here? Go ahead, Teresa.
Tagging on what Michelle said is, he knew what he was going to do, but he didn't walk up with a big smile on his face, say, oh, no worries. He really entered into their grief. And as Jane said, he really let them be seen and heard. So they knew he was really with them. And I almost think that when the miracle happened and he raised Lazarus, they will always remember that Jesus was there in their pain and met them there as well. So that's where the empathy, and he didn't block that and just rush to, I got a great plan here. So I like that part.
Yeah. And I think back even to what you shared in the beginning here, Teresa, about being in the room and being able to notice that one lost sheep that's just kind of looks emotionally perturbed and having a desire to be curious and see that person. We can start to see how this is, folks, this is something that's desperately needed. Other people to be seen by others, like to be seen in their pain by others. And oh, what healing could come forth from that, even if we just create a little bit of space. Suzanne, we'll go to you and then we'll jump into our vices and virtues.
I just want to say that we can hold space with Jesus right here, because we're making assumptions that we know why he was perturbed and deeply troubled. We do know that he was, but we don't know fully why. We do know how much he loved Martha and Mary and the beauty of that relationship that he did have with them. So we could speculate. And we do know that he knew he was about to raise him, but we don't fully know what Jesus was actually going through emotionally, but we can hold space for him and just sit with him in this. And if he wanted through his Holy Spirit to reveal some of it to us, he could, but I'm just thinking it's a beautiful way to sit with Jesus in this.
I love it. That's amazing. That's amazing. I love it. I mean, the scripture just comes alive, right? And it's so deeply personal. Thank you, Suzanne. That's awesome. All right, moving into the section of the podcast here where we start to explore a little bit more explicitly. What does it mean to show up virtuously and viciously on this? So again, these are my thoughts, and I invite people to kind of share their opinions on this so that we can all grow together. It's my learner showing up. Okay, so the virtuous side leads to interdependence. Remember, interdependence is where we're seeing the other person as gift and we're receiving the other person as gift, and we're seeing ourselves as gift and being able to give ourselves as gift. So there's this beautiful interdependence in the body of Christ. And so what I see here with empathy is we honor and we own our emotions. So we see our emotions, we honor them, and then we honor the emotions of others. And so when I say honor, it just, all it is like the opposite. If we think of the opposite of honoring something is we just discard it. There's really no value to it. And it doesn't mean that we have to indulge, but we just honor it for what it's due. And I think if there's anything that we've realized in mindset coaching, often people can be very dismissive of their emotions. And folks, when they do that, they go vicious. They go vicious. And so when they look at some kind of the vicious side of these things, I was reflecting on this. How might empathy go independent? I see it when I project my emotions onto others, right? So I'm not necessarily receiving or seeing my own emotions, but rather I project it onto other people. And so somebody may be sharing something that's going on, and then we kind of pivot into, oh, I know exactly how you feel, which can be a desire to be empathetic, but do we really know? Do we really know? Or are we perhaps even being presumptuous? In that place, I can see it kind of going down a place of independence because the focus here is on ourselves in a subtle way. We're kind of listening in, but we're really just listening to our own emotions on how we're receiving the other person, rather being attuned and attentive to how that other person, what's going on in that person's interior life, and getting curious, like so many people identified here as the way this talent shows up as a strength. How might it lead to dependence? Is where I need others to validate my emotions in order to validate them myself. So before I can acknowledge my own emotions on something, I need somebody else to kind of validate me in them, which means that it's never enough for me to just feel sad. I need somebody else to know that I'm sad. I got to call up and this is where, and I got to call up and I got to vent. Venting, I don't know if it's always good. I don't know if it's always good. I think we say venting because it could be kind of a whitewashed way of gossiping or kvetching or sitting in your toxic story or your like, we got to be careful with what our intention is when we are, quote, venting. All right. Because then it leads into here, where I see the codependence is like we validate one another's indulgent or antecedent emotions. Okay. So those indulgent emotions are those ones that just, they bear no fruit, right? We don't move forward. We just kind of get stuck in them. We talk more about this in our Metanoia Catholic Academy. Antecedent emotions, that's a term that Aquinas uses for an emotion that is not really passed through reason, right? Our emotions are our natural connection to our human psyche, as the Catechism tells us. So we think things in our psyche, and then our emotions start to make those things that we think, the invisible here, make it incarnate in and through our bodies, and then incline us into some sort of an action. So antecedent emotions, they're not really subject to reason here. And ultimately we do that so we don't have to take emotional responsibility. Okay, so where this might show up is you just have the friend that you call up, you tell them about how terrible your day was, and then your friend tells you about how terrible their day was, but there's no real challenging that's going on here. It's two victims that are going back and forth and just reinforcing that they're victims to their emotion, they're victims to their circumstances, and they're stuck there. It's something, but they feel like there's some connection that's taking place, but it's really a very shallow connection that's just enabling the person to stay in that victim-y place. Okay, this is where I kind of want to open up the floor. How is this landing with the people on here, with the callers? Michelle Simpson.
This lands very true for how my empathy has been in the past. And only
Tell me
doing
more.
the work that we're doing through MCA is that beginning to change. So the vicious
Okay.
side is ringing true for me on how my empathy would show up
Okay.
versus the virtuous part.
Did you find yourself kind of falling into the independence, dependence, or codependence, or all three? How is it?
Pretty much dependence and codependence.
I see. Okay. Okay.
I tend to I've tended in the past to kind of shove my emotions down, although you can see my emotions kind of on my face. I hide them, or I pretend like they weren't there, even though they were.
Okay. So
And now
dismissing the emotion. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, and now I'm just learning how to be able to sit in my emotion, and it's okay, and to see where they're coming from.
Okay. Is there anything, can you share, was there a thought that you captured that was kind of inclining you to see just suppressing your emotions as the best thing to do in that moment?
I wasn't being heard.
Okay. I wasn't being heard.
in the situation in the house.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so it's better to just, since I'm not going to be heard anyways, it's better to just kind of brush them away. See,
And
it's
I'm learning not to
interesting.
do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting here that when we do that, Michelle, like we hear so often it comes up in coaching, but the funny thing is like, I'm not heard by the other person. So I just brush it away, but now I'm not heard by two people. I'm one of the other people that I'm not heard by. I'm not seen by myself. Right. Which is, it's doubly painful because we know it's there, but we're just turning a blind eye to it. And so you're finding freedom right now, or it sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I will. because I love our academy and the work that we're doing at the Metanoia Catholic Academy. But you're finding just by at least allowing yourself to see the emotion and allow it at this point.
Correct.
And what's that been like for you?
Freeing.
Freeing.
Yeah.
Freeing.
Actually
Love it.
know that I have an emotion. Like I just denied that I had emotions.
Woohoo! Wow. We got humans on this call. Awesome. Awesome. Anything else? Thank you so much, Michelle. Anything else? Michelle D, Carrie, Melissa, anybody else want to jump in here? Michelle D, go for it.
Yeah, while she's talking, I'm thinking of another way that I've gone in the past, in probably into independence, in when I'm sitting in my own emotional soup, not being able to hear someone else who's like over the top emotionally and having some difficulty holding space for them. So I shut down, not my own emotion, but like my response to their emotion. That's been something that's happened in the past before I learned how to just hold space. Like I can just hold space here and hear all of your good, bad, whatever, usually bad, but and nothing is bad, right? The emotions are not bad. We're just feeling them and expressing them. But in that independent space, that vicious side of, I think the thought was, I can't handle this right now. Like my cup's full. Actually, the phrase I used to use was, my dustbin's full. And that's from a kid's movie years ago, but don't dump your dust in my dustbin. My dustbin's full. Not very nice.
I love it. I know. I get it. I get it. And I wonder here, folks, is like it's like no emotion is bad. All right. And there's the emotions are morally neutral. We read that in our catechism. And and at the same time, there is this natural inclination for us, and I don't know if this is completely off to do this, to be able to say there's a negative emotion and then there's positive emotions. I mean, even in the spiritual life, we can talk about consolations and desolations, right? Where there's these things that prick our conscience, these movements of our spiritual appetite, so to speak. And I think that like we can say that most of us would enjoy resting in the emotion of joy and peace or happiness versus sadness, depression, anxiety. And perhaps what distinguishes those emotions are where we're focusing, right? And sometimes it's like when we focus on the reality of the fall and those things that are here as a consequence of the fall, right? Sin in our world. It's not too much of a surprise that we find ourselves feeling in our bodies the reality of that fall. And it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing to do. Sometimes it's a very honest and very much in integrity. It's very honest for somebody whose child is in apostasy and is away from the faith to feel an emotion of sadness at the thought or emotion of concern at the thought, right? But then ultimately we have to see, okay, how are we bringing the Lord into that to redeem that emotion so that we might not wallow in the sadness, but we might experience, that blended emotion of sorrow, but hope also at the same time. Melissa, open up to you. And then we're going to move into our mindsets here as we get ready to wrap up. Justin, I see your camera came on, so I'd love to hear from you too.
Just real quickly, I went through a couple different thoughts because we showed a great empathy as a team rehabilitating stroke patients. And our motto was, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
So, it kind of built a nice patient relationship to just let people know, like, I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm here if you need anything. And then the strategic comes in. We sat in that space, but then we had a plan. So they didn't get stuck wallow, because that's very easy to do with something so significant. So I've
Mhm.
had to learn that that's an extreme circumstance, but just with, everyday people, I had to like get out of the strategy so quickly, and the healer, because you want to heal and help
Mhm.
these people to heal, but have to learn how to just sit in the space of, okay, let them, let me or myself or whoever, others, to express what they're feeling, stay there for a little bit. And I guess the hard part for me is, okay, we're ready. When are we ready to go? Because
Mhm.
I want to be the fixer, or, so I'm just learning to kind of let people, just like, hey, I'm here if you need anything, especially with my kids, because sometimes they just want to talk and they don't want to be fixed at that moment. They just
Mhm.
want to express. And, Mama Bear
They want to be
wants,
loved.
yes, and loved. And they know
Mhm.
too that they're loved, because that's how we're able to communicate and feel safe to communicate with each other, as far as being able to tell you whatever they need to tell you and not feel judged. So it's a beautiful thing, but just letting them have that space to say, hey, I'm here for you. I see you. And the nonverbals too, because you can pick up on people so quickly. You can see those emotions and everything without people even saying anything. People talk to
Mhm.
you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Justin, I'm gonna put you on hold here for a moment as I go into this last slide, and then I'll give you certainly some opportunity to jump in here. I love your insights. Okay, so uh, folks, thank you for contributing all those things here. So now we kind of pivot here to consider what might be the thoughts that are behind that virtuous mindset, and also those three different types of vicious manifestations of this strength. Okay, so virtuous, I can empathize, though I might not sympathize. This is one of the things that I like, because I think that oftentimes there's a thought that when I empathize with somebody, meaning like I'm sitting there in their emotion with them, that automatically I agree with whatever their point of view might be. Okay. So I can't be empathetic with somebody that is, has different opinions on marriage than I do, or has different opinions on abortion than I do. And there's this distinction in our language between empathy and sympathy. Empathy, and I love this, empathy is when you can kind of rest in that emotional space and you can kind of share that emotional space with the other person, and you can really kind of be open to that. But sympathizing is when you actually agree with whatever's behind their emotion. Okay. And so I think something that's really good is identifying when you are empathizing with somebody and when you are sympathizing with somebody. So this way you can show up in integrity while still holding the space for them emotionally and still seeing them. There's something that's very loving here. So I think of even Jesus, when he saw the rich young man walk away, right? There was a sympathy that was there. He was able to kind of, there was this, he walked away sad, this young man. We don't really know what was going on in Jesus, but I imagine that I know that Jesus let this person walk away. Or the same thing on John chapter 6, John 6:66, where a lot of people walked away after the bread of life discourse. He's like, I get it. Like, are you going to go away too? I get it. But then there's also, it's like, ultimately, what are you going to choose? And we see here that our emotions don't override our reason. This is in keeping with our Catholic anthropology. Our emotions are meant to be subject to reason. Okay. So next thing, I have permission to feel however you have permission to feel however you feel. And so do I, right? That's that emotional responsibility. Seeing another means of sharing in their emotional life as well, like just seeing emotions as a means of sharing in somebody's life. How these vicious mindsets might show up in empathy. I know just how you feel when you feel so tempted to jump into, and you may but it may not necessarily. Just be conscious if we're going into projecting our own emotional interpretation, our own feelings on somebody else. It can kind of be disruptive, and it puts a spotlight on us. Not saying this always happens, but just be aware. Next thing, I need you to feel blank, insert whatever that emotion. I need you, the other person, to feel what I am feeling in order to know that I'm seen. That's that dependence showing up. I need to feel validated in my emotions by somebody else kind of seeing me in my emotion. And then I kind of tongue in cheek here when we show up in that codependent, I'm just going to vent, but this stays between us. You know, I'm just going to vent and I'm going to gossip and I'm going to, you know, do whatever, but don't challenge me. Just let me be like, and there's a space, I would say, for somebody being like, hey, I'm working through this. I want to say this out loud. Would you mind me just being a sounding board? I may kind of go into like just being aware that you're doing it at least is important if you're going to be venting. And then it's just like, okay, but like, just know that as soon as you voice something out loud, it's out there, right? And venting, gossiping can go kind of very close. Okay. Closing thoughts. Justin, any closing thoughts that you wanted to jump in here? And I said I'd save a space for you, man.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No, and I know for me, for empathy, it's particularly in some of the other relationship building themes in general, it's really helped me to, in my mind, they're very grounded in the virtue of justice, in that you are rendering to others what they are due. And what they are due is for them to, what they are due is the good. And so when you honor their emotions, their emotional state, and that relationship, it's always to honor them, not some particular facet of them. So not a particular emotion, not a particular emotional state, but that state exists, but it's a part of them, and that you can help them see that, know that, and not be afraid of it.
I love that. You can help them see that.
Yeah.
And just folks, how often are we don't even have the ability to see ourselves only in the light of the other person. Man cannot know himself except the sincere gift. Like, we need other people. We can't come to know ourselves outside of relationship.
Yeah. And realizing, in my life, when it does become vicious, I know another aspect of it is this concept of excessive deference to another person. And it comes about when you start seeing them only as their emotions. And so it almost becomes a subtle kind of manipulation, in a sense that, well, I know that they're the angry person, and so I'm just going to interact them with this way, or I'm going to avoid them, or I'm going to, pull from my bag of tricks things that I can say to stunt them or whatever, but
or emotionally
only
manage
relate
them.
Right. Yeah. Emotionally manage them. Exactly. Or likewise, I need this person to be the happy person, and so I'm going to try to nudge them in that direction because that's the only emotion that I want to experience with them. And
yes,
it's not honoring them in the end, although you think it is. And so it's forcing empathy to do something it's not meant to do. Bad things come about usually in that case.
Awesome. Justin, thanks, man. Any other closing remarks here as we wrap up? Going once, going twice. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll say, when we started out, and my empathy is lower, it's much lower than my husband's, which I would have never guessed. I'm 13, he's 8. And so you're starting to talk, and I'm thinking, well, I got to give this time, because I'm thinking this can't be right. But I'm seeing how I experience empathy and what I do with it really differently because of listening to this. And I will go back and re-listen and have more thoughts and gain more insight. So thank you very much, Matt.
Awesome. That's why we do the podcast. All right, folks. That pretty much wraps it up for us. I know I am being empathetic with the fact that I am 8 minutes overdue, and my wife is looking for me to take over on childcare. So thanks for listening with us. And next week, we're going to be focusing on achiever. That's going to be our next call. So we're going to focus on that signature theme. Lots of fun there. And again, if you want to actually, you heard people talking about getting coached and kind of growing in the virtue of their strengths. Well, we're doing a lot of this work in our Metanoia Catholic Academy. So if you go to CatholicCoaching.com, you click on Get Coached, you can learn a little bit about our membership there, Metanoia Catholic Academy. That's where we actually host these calls. And then every other week, we actually do a strengths call where we're helping people to name, claim, tame, and aim their strengths in a more personal way. So if you want to be a part of that, join the Metanoia Catholic Academy. There's a lot of other fun stuff, group coaching that's going on there as well. And so excited, especially to have this as a resource out there for parishes. So many parishes now are leveraging CliftonStrengths as a way of helping people to live in the virtue of their strengths, live in their gift, right? Because that's what really is the foundational element of an engaged parish, they find, or any engaged organization, is when people are given the opportunity to do what they do best on a regular basis in their place of work or in their parish. So we love it. And folks, stay tuned. Tune in next time and check out the Metanoia Catholic Academy. God bless.